48 Hours of Madness, Part 2. Yo, what's going on? It's someone that's no one, and I'm glad to be bringing this video finally. Welcome back to today's report. Today's report is coming from Charles, which was sent in. When this happened, 2016, the drugs used: ketamine, cocaine, 25x-NBOMe, MDMA, and tobacco. The dose, quote, hard to say. Gender, male. Weight, 65 kilograms, or 145 pounds. Age, 19 at the time. Height, 5'9". Prior experience, years of weed smoking, has done all drugs listed prior. And the setting, in Northeast England at several places. So what is there really to say? Well, other than some substances that were added after. Welcome to part 2 of the popular 48 Hours of Madness, which it's been since 2019 when we dropped that, so I know a lot of you are ready for this. I don't want to keep you from it, so without further ado, let's dive right into this. Outside was dark, but only the half dark that you get just on the outskirts of the city. The light pollution seeps into the sky. The air was brisk too. A cold wind being funneled down the street, slanted on a hill, headed in the direction of the North Sea. Me and Ella rolled a couple cigarettes and sat on the edge of the road to smoke, and she checked up on me again, asking if I was doing alright after my wild time inside. I tried to explain anything of what happened, but I could barely hold it together in my head at the time, let alone form it into words. Yeah, good, is all I managed to get out at the time we were outside. As we headed back inside, I could feel the trip from the NBOMe starting to form in my vision, alongside a feeling of slight nausea I usually experience. The world feeling just slightly off, as if your head isn't quite aligned with your shoulders anymore. The ketamine was still floating around in my system as well, which didn't help me calm myself before the trip fully kicked in. Although, our brief trip outside had helped release some of the panic from earlier. I started to try to ease myself, comforting myself that it'll be fine. I've had NBOMe before, and it's been alright. Just maybe a little wonky, and we'll get through this night just fine. I mentioned to Ella that I thought the acid was some imposter, maybe NBOMe, but I wasn't entirely sure. Shit, man, you gonna be okay? You smashed a decent bit, she asked. I replied I should be all good. Once the trip kicks in, and I can get in the groove of the night, it should be smooth sailing. We came back in, and I could hear Chris and Jack laughing together in the other room with something playing on the TV. From the noise, it was easy to tell they had been hitting the booze. We dipped in the room briefly on the way to Ella's room to grab a bag of Coke, just in case we felt like doing a bit later in the night. We sat back on the bed and kicked back. Ella hits a couple more lines of Ket, and I declined her offer of more for myself. I was still pretty set on that being enough for me that night. A nice surprise was that I could feel my mood being lifted with the trip that was coming on now. The stress in my chest was easing, and I could feel myself getting into the music that we put on before settling in. My spirit was being lifted as well, as me and Ella talked about insane schemes and bizarre abstract concepts and theories regarding anything that came to mind. We started playing a fun game of her taking a bump of Ket and spacing out for a couple minutes, then me asking, "What are you thinking about?" and listening to whatever insane shit she spouted and drawing it to the best of my ability. One that sticks with me, and I still have a drawing of, is a theory she conceived that the universe was governed by one single mysterious woman who oversees everything, but the source of her power is cod liver oil and nothing more. The oil was a secret gift and the key to all sorts of superhuman powers. Just, we had been too narrow-minded to submit to it ourselves. I must say that here onward is where my memory starts to fail, and there are quite a few gaps. I presume from the NBOMe kicking in, and most likely some from the Ket. The next thing I remember, quite some time had passed. I'm not sure what we were doing, but the NBOMe was really starting to take effects. The world was feeling wonky, my palms clammy, my brain twisting backwards, my disposition nervous, and a real bad feeling in my gut. Something that's always stuck with me with NBOMe is the lack of straight-up visuals, as is accustomed to LSD. It's always had the effect on me of making everything feel a little upset and warped, but not to the point of entertainment, just enough to make you feel uneasy. That, alongside the sweaty palms and occasional tightening of the jaw. I slowly look around. It's dark outside the window, and Ella is lying across the room on the bed, and I'm sitting at her desk, about 6 feet away. She's wrapped up in duvet covers and seems to be asleep or passed out. I can hear her breathing fine, so I leave her be. My legs are feeling tense in the chair, so I go put on some music. I work to pick my headphones out my pocket and try my best to untangle them before I give up on the jumbled mess and stuff them in my ears. I flick through my usual playlist and throw on something I've been enjoying recently and try to relax. I take a deep breath and the music fades in. A slow, gradual pumping bass line pierces my head. I feel as if my breath has been stolen, and I squirm in my chair involuntarily. I thought I hadn't been tripping that hard, but man, I just proven myself wrong. The music has a hold on my brain, and I hung on every note. But this wasn't some sort of blissful lack of control like a decent dose of MDMA. It was an electric fever that had me tighten its grip as I wreathed and gasped for breath in the dark. My eyes fluttered shut, and my vision was filled with a startling white light. In front of me, a wall of identical neon blue faces span and rotated in place in perfect synchronization and rhythm to the music. My vision zoomed in closer to one until it was enveloped in blue, and the blue faded to black, and from the black there emerged a pale figure of a woman floating in the dark. She was positioned as if flying down, and I spun high around before zooming in on her hand, where she was wearing an intricate ring with a stone of black obsidian. As I flew in closer out of the dark of space, a sort of platform appeared and surrounded it, on which there were gathered around 50 robed figures, some holding books, some chalices, and other sorts of religious items, brandished with abstract images and textures. It was as if I had stumbled upon some strange psychedelic communion. As I landed on this platform, I looked around. It was circular in shape, made of pale flagstones, and surrounded by large stone columns, creating a similar atmosphere as an ancient Greek amphitheater. But instead of a stage, it funneled in, leading to a giant dark doorway. What I had previously perceived as the woman's obsidian ring, I now saw was a huge archway. The stone was a rippling dark portal, and the figures were slowly passing through the portal one by one, and I felt the urge to join their congregation and pass through it myself. I started to approach down the steps towards the portal. As each person went through, it rippled like a liquid, not like water though, but closer to something thicker, like honey or molten wax. But before I could get too close, one of the hooded figures turned and raised a hand to me. I stopped moving, and a voice projected into my mind from the figure, and it said, "Stop. This doorway is not for you. You are not ready. Not yet." The voice spoke calmly, but there was an urgency behind the message. Before I could contemplate the message further, my eyes suddenly shot open, and I came to with a jolt. I was back in the bedroom. I had slumped against the wall, and my head must have fallen loose, because I had one hell of a stiff neck. How long had I been sitting here, totally off this planet? I had absolutely no idea. I tried to center myself again by looking around the room. It was still dark in the room. I could barely make out anything in the dark, but strange shapes and figures morphed in and out of black if I kept my eyes open for more than a couple seconds. The door was then opened, and light from the hallway broke through the door, and I was startled by the change. I shielded my eyes and tried to adjust. "Hey dude, you doing alright?" It was Ella, standing in the doorway, peering in at me. My heart leaped for a second, and I looked over to the bed where I thought she had been asleep this entire time. But I saw it was only my jacket and the duvet on there. I must have totally imagined the movement and sound of her breathing across the way from me. I pulled myself up to my feet. I was finding coordination very hard after being sat down for whatever length of time. Yeah, just had the weirdest fucking visions. I'll tell you about it when I'm sober. I replied the best I could. Glad you're doing alright. You've been in here quite a while. I was just heading out for a cig. Do you want one? And we made our way out and back in again with little trouble. I seemed to be trembling a lot and finding myself needing to relax my muscles over and over. We chatted for a while and Ella brought me up to speed on what I missed. Nothing much, it seemed like. She had carried on with some more Ket and Chris and Jack with their drinking, and it seemed like now we were making the decision to go for either the coke or MDMA route for the night. I tried running both in the same night before, and it just ended up being a waste of both substances, an experience not equal to the sum of its parts, I guess you could say. We headed back inside and into the living room. I slumped down on the couch and tried to stabilize my vision. Everywhere I looked, it felt as if closer objects were in 3D, but everything behind them was flat on 2D painted panels, like a stage play or old film. I sat there and thought, okay, I'm a couple hours into the NBOMe now, so it shouldn't get much worse than this. You've been in worse situations than this. It's all good. You got this. As these thoughts went through, I started to eyeball the decent-sized baggie of MDMA lying out on the table, with maybe a little too much enthusiasm. The MD basically kicked the NBOMe into next gear, and it was an awful experience. I started drifting into delirium, seeing shadow people through the window with auditory hallucinations. The next morning, we tried to keep ourselves going with the coke, and it basically brought up loads of conflict in the group, and we get split up when we try to head into the city center, and had my friend shouting at people on the subway since he was convinced there were police after him. It was a real fucking weird time.